Hello, everyone. Welcome back to COVID Chats. My guest for this episode is Peter Fox. Peter is a writer who has appeared in countless reputable publications like Tablet and The Forward. He is a particularly exciting guest for me as he is the first person I've spoken to on this program outside of my network of friends, family, and colleagues. If you have any recommendations for further guests, please leave a comment below. Now, on to episode 19 of COVID Chats. Hello, Mr. Fox, and welcome to episode 19 of COVID Chats.
Hi, nice to be on your show.
A pleasure to have you here. This is exciting for me. You're the first guest who is outside my network of friends, family friends, peers, colleagues. You were recommended to me by your godfather, some personal family connection of yours, Mark Bloomberg.
I believe it was from a Pi brother from my chapter at Drexel University. I think his name
Mark.
was Mark Bloomberg, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so it was from him. I knew he ran something in API, some regional board or group on Facebook that I joined, and then he was like,
Yeah.
I've been watching the program, talk to Peter.
And you're in Rutgers, you were from the Rutgers API?
Yes, yeah, I went to the Rutgers API, and I spent one semester out in California as part of like a exchange program of sorts. And while I was there, I got to be a part of their chapter in Chico, California. So that was fun to kind of see how the chapter ran. Yeah, that was exciting. So I got a bunch of questions for you, but the first one is just, how are you?
I'm doing really well, actually. Probably better than I was a few weeks ago. My grandmother was one of the many people who contracted COVID, and it was definitely unexpected because we'd been following all the right guidelines probably a week before it became official, back in early March when we heard what was happening up in Westchester County, New Rochelle.
Right.
It was spreading in the Orthodox Jewish community, no fault of their own, of course, but we're involved in the local Jewish community here in Paramus, New Jersey, which is part of Bergen County. And that was quickly becoming the epicenter of the New Jersey cases. So we actually changed our habits pretty early on in the process to reduce our risk of coming in contact with the virus. And yet it still found its way into her lungs. So it was a little bit scary. She was in the hospital. She was admitted March 28th and was there for 5 nights. And then she was released April 4th. But I think there's a little bit of a misconception that being released from the hospital is the Disney ending, and It's not that simple. Once she came back home, her symptoms would fluctuate. So some days it would be kind of stable, and then other days she'd have this real acute nausea and wouldn't be able to eat anything. It would just feel, really uncomfortable the whole time, extremely painful. So even when she was released from the hospital, I wasn't quite sure if she was going to make it.
Right.
She's 91. She has emphysema, a missing spleen, a 2-time breast cancer survivor.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it almost feels like it was scripted because it aligned with Passover, and she was passed over this year. And I feel like she was almost rewarded for doing all the right things. Not that anyone is ever at fault for getting the virus, of course, but we had really practiced every single guideline that you would think of, like even wiping down groceries, probably a little bit obsessively at first. So we were really clean. I think that there's probably some human error that you just can't predict, that things like faucets, you try and wipe those down, but if you're getting your water from like a shared faucet, unless you're disinfecting that every time, that could be a way to spread it. So I've never had symptoms, but I could probably presume that I have, that I'm like a silent carrier, possibly. And fortunately for my grandmother, even though at some points it looked like she might not make it, I think because we addressed the situation probably earlier on in the timeline, she didn't have the worst symptoms that someone could have. Luckily, even though she has respiratory issues in her natural state, that wasn't her main symptom that was giving her the issues. And she had a low fever. The
Mm,
people who are tending to die from the disease, their fevers go over 104, 105. I think
right.
the highest her fever got was, I don't think it went above like 102. So that's still in a dangerous territory. She was hospitalized, but she was able to bring it back down to the hundreds, and um, a lot of rest. And I mean, every day is sort of like its own week because things could change the next day. But fortunately, as of April 14th, her doctor deemed her to be recovered. She hasn't officially been retested, so
Mm,
she could still be a carrier, but she's
right.
not a danger to herself anymore.
Mm,
But we don't know if she is infectious to other people, and I
right.
don't know if I am either. But I don't have any symptoms, and
Right.
she's over her symptoms now, so that's good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I'm so happy for you. I mean, that is just, it's amazing. Amazing for so many reasons. The odds being stacked against her with her age and her previous health conditions. So
mm,
it's really wonderful that she's getting better. But yes, of course, as you mentioned, she's not out of the woods yet. That's been one of the things with the novel coronavirus. It's so new to us and the medical community, despite the knowledge that we do have about viruses and about previous coronaviruses. There's all these crazy stories. I'm sure you've read some of them, but it coming back in other places, people testing positive and then testing negative later. But at least she's in a stable position now.
yeah, and actually, her condition has always been, I think, classified as stable because
Mm,
unless you're being intubated and like in a comatose kind of state where you can't even like breathe on your own without ventilation, um, I think it has to be very severe symptoms to be classified as not being stable. So even though she could have died, she was actually uh, considered stable.
huh.
And she actually considers her symptoms to have been relatively mild to what it could have been. So her biggest issue was like feeling nauseous.
Mm,
So she's lucky that she didn't get too severe of respiratory issues because that probably would have
right.
uh, taken her out.
Yeah. Yeah. The respiratory issues, especially with someone with, emphysema in their background. So it sounds like she caught it pretty early and you recognized that and took her to the hospital right away.
I think so, yeah, because what was it? I think the New York lockdown, or at first it was an encouraged
Right.
shelter in place. I think that started around March 12th. I'd have to look down to be precise. And then she went to the hospital March 28th. So that kind of lines up with, I don't know how she exactly got it, but it wouldn't be surprising if uh, I passed it on to her asymptomatically because I commute into New York City
Hmm.
every day for work. So that would be one suspicion, but who knows? It could be anywhere. So
Right. Yeah. It could be anywhere. The airborne nature of it and the asymptomatic nature, as you were saying. I mean, it's one of those weird viruses that spreads in ways that are hard to track. And we've seen better tracking methods in some of these authoritative countries,
yeah,
which has its merit maybe in terms of shutting down the spread, but certainly is cause for concern for people who enjoy their privacy and freedom, us
yeah.
Americans. So, a big thing with your grandmother's battle with this was you were very active on social media. I was checking out some of your Instagram and Twitter. What was it like going through that with the internet on your side?
Oh, it was a very strange phenomenon because a lot of times people consider social media to be toxic, but really, I think things like Twitter, especially, they're very powerful, and that goes in both directions. So
Totally.
you can be cyberbullied or be harassed, and that's awful. But you could also see the generosity in full magnitude, and I think that's exactly what happened in these dire circumstances. People actually become a lot nicer to each other, and it was amazing. Nothing like that had ever
Right.
happened like that to me remotely.
Mm,
And I kind of feel like some of the good energy that came from it, it almost like manifested itself in the physical world. So
mm,
I don't know. She had all like thousands of people who I don't know, like cheering her on, who were interested in following her progress. So in a way, it almost feels like now that we're in lockdown mode, um, everyone's life has almost become like a documentary, and some
Mm,
people become like interested in following because we all are experiencing this to different magnitudes, obviously based off of different factors. Socioeconomics is a big one,
sure.
but to a certain extent, we're all going through the same crisis. So I think people were just fascinated to see if this 91-year-old sweet grandmother is going to make it through. And it almost feels like to me that like it almost had to work out because they're all cheering for her. So it it definitely helped offset the gut wrenching feeling of it all because every day was kind of like gloomy. I felt, especially when she came back from the hospital, it also felt like I'm living with like a dying person.
Mm,
But hearing everyone so enthusiastic saying that that was like the highlight of their week, hearing that she's like pulling through, that made it a lot better. So if I didn't have like this whole social media experience of people rooting for her and sharing her story, it would have felt a little more isolating.
yeah.
So I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I have basically everything that I need, and her situation was not as perilous as it could have been. And
Mm,
plus, she got all these like fan people. Even after she's recovered, they people are like still chatting about her. It's really funny.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, it does show you, it shows you the power of the internet, and, it can be a positive place. It doesn't have to be this toxic place, which unfortunately I feel like we've come to know
yeah.
to be. Certainly there's those pockets of positivity, but now it's those pockets have gotten a lot bigger. Do you think that positivity is going to last?
Yeah, well, I think it's always been there too. I think it depends on a couple factors. It depends on how you're personally using your social media presence, um, and if I think if you're trying to put out positivity, that positivity comes back at you.
Mm,
And then sometimes we make mistakes or say things that attract negativity, and maybe those could be learning experiences. But yeah, it's definitely something I've experienced on both ends, and I try and focus more on the positive.
yeah,
So to answer your question, I think that it'll continue to go in both ways. I think you see a lot of amazing things happen online where people raise millions for charity that never would have happened if not for sharing someone's story.
mm,
Or but then you also have things where people get bullied, especially like with teenagers, and you know leads to there's like a heightened risk of teen suicide, all that type of stuff. And even for adults, not necessarily to that um, tragic extent, but people whose careers could be endangered based on like past mistakes. So
yeah.
we all have to view ourselves as trying to use everything as a tool um, for good, and hopefully we all use it responsibly.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
no, I agree. I think something that you mentioned is really true. The internet kind of has this karmic, this karma quality to it, where if you're spending time on Twitter, bashing people and being toxic, that comes back to you. But if you're, helping raise money for people, or you're offering, good wishes for somebody's sick grandmother, like you're suddenly in the good sphere of Twitter, and the goodness comes with you. So it is, I think going forward it will just be about, the places that you find yourself in online, very similarly to the places you find yourself in real life, and
Yeah, one of the interesting circumstances that have come from the COVID pandemic is that prior to this crisis, most of us viewed social media to not be the real world.
right,
And to a certain extent, I agree. But I think to a certain extent, I also think it's a misperception of what social media is, because now most of our social lives are through social media. Even right now, we're interacting through a web camera. So we're
yeah,
just digital pixels. Um, what I would say though is that something like Twitter, when you're getting opinions, uh, it's only one fraction of the whole picture, but it's there are fake people, but they're who are bots, but they're also real people, and you can connect meaningfully.
Mm,
So I think that's one of the few silver linings of all of this. I think we're finding how technology can better assist us in improving our lives and even having some sustainable social connection as well.
yeah. Yeah, it's basically our only means of social connection now. So
Yeah,
we gotta work with what we have and hopefully, do it in a positive way. Um, it's for the best, certainly, and we all need it now more than ever. Nobody has time for people's toxic nature online. It's like I just need something good right now to take my mind off of it. Please don't be mean for no reason.
yeah.
I think we're all praying for that a little bit. So pivoting a little bit, I'm
Okay.
wondering, has COVID impacted the gay and LGBTQ community in ways that aren't known or would be surprising to some?
That's a really good question. I've thought about that a little bit. I mean, I think there are like obvious things that have been affected. Like, there are not going to be pride parades in June, probably not. I think San Francisco already canceled that.
Oh
So
well,
I've already thought about how lucky we were that the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which for people who might not be familiar, that sort of catalyzed the gay LGBTQ civil rights advocacy movement.
right.
That happened 1969, and it was nice to see that got a lot of media attention last year.
Mm,
I think like a record number of people came to the World Pride 50th anniversary Stonewall March in New York last year.
really?
I think that's good because you don't get to hear a lot of gay history
Yeah.
almost ever. Now it was on the news for like every day for a week. That was amazing. That wouldn't have been the same if it happened in 1970.
Right.
So I kind of take perspective in that way.
Mm,
But I don't know. I've also been thinking about how people who might be in the closet or they might be with their families, and what it might be like to come out but not have an escape to go to. Because a lot of uh, people, if they're coming out, it's often like it was for me. You come home from college vacation or something, and you say what you have to say, but then you go back to school, and there's sort of a grace period, and
mm,
it's like a necessary healing. Even if you have supportive family members, you need
right.
like your space to process things,
Sure.
uh, and you don't have that now. So I I'm not worried, but I do think that there are probably some situations where uh, younger people, if they're high schoolers or uh, college students, young adults,
Mm,
how they might not even be preparing to come out, or maybe somehow it comes up and that creates heightened tension while they're in quarantine.
mm. Are
Um,
there? Sorry to jump in, but are there online communities where people are able to talk about that and express that in light of the fact that they're closed in with their family members? Have you seen that at all?
um, Probably. I'm not aware of that,
Okay,
but I'm sure that there's probably
exist.
different Facebook groups and stuff, and I hope so because that'd be good.
Yeah, no, I mean everyone needs an outlet now, in really in every sense of the word, whether it be for your internal feelings about who you are as a person to just like I need to take a walk outside, otherwise I'm going to kill everybody in this house.
Yeah.
um, so I read your article in the forward. Will we ever get to have sex again? And of course, I agree that sexual behavior and dating must change and has changed in the wake of the virus. But will that continue afterwards? How do you think dating and sexual behavior will be different?
um, I've thought a lot about this, and for me personally, I feel that dating is something that interests me. I'm more interested in marriage now than
Right.
like more spontaneous dating and playing the field, seeing
Mm,
uh, what personality you like best. I don't know that's going to be the case for most other people, but for me, I would actually want to really take dates much more seriously and um, think, could this last longer? Could we also, you'd have to think about more permanent live-in situations because not everyone lives with their romantic partner.
Right.
But if you're currently in a relationship right now, and especially if you're living in New York City and you don't live with your romantic partner, I mean, you can't really be dating them unless they live right down the street. Because you
Yeah.
can't. It's, as essential as it is, it's not essential enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself more interested in like the long-term partners and marriage in light of the fact that we are shelter in place, because this is like time that we're losing to have the freedom to date and to try different things? Is that why you're shifting towards that, or is that just because that's where you are in your life?
Oh, well, I think in a funny way, I'm always been a little bit more traditional, if a
Mm.
gay person can be traditional,
Oh, yeah.
but I'd say certainly even more so under this situation.
Mm.
It's like, who would want to, I mean, a lot of people would want to just go back to the way things used to be, but it's going to be a couple years. I'm not saying that
Right.
people aren't going to return to their jobs and normal functioning, but if a vaccine isn't available for 18 to 24 months, and that's sort of supposedly on the earlier scale, because
Right.
that would be rapid progression,
Mm.
well, then this will always be around, even if we're not in lockdown. So that what's scary to me is that kissing has become the most dangerous sex act, and everything else kind of is safer if you're doing safe. You still have to
Right.
be safe.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I
Mm.
mean, it's kind of like hilarious to me that kissing is supposed to be the most innocent
Right.
gesture, like the first sign of expressing like true feelings for someone after like a first or second date.
Right.
But now that almost seems like the most precious act. Like, whoa, you really have to know me if you want to get that close. Like,
Back up.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I hope I'm immune, but you can't think that way. So.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope you're immune. I hope I'm immune. I mean, all these studies out here saying, 70% of people will have it by the time it's over. I mean, it's scary stuff, but we have to hope for the best in terms of that. But yeah, no, I'm definitely like you. I've been thinking about sort of, how will sexual behavior change? How will dating change? I'm kind of torn between these two, like, we're either one going to see a baby boom and like a return to free love of the 60s and people like getting after it and multiple partners and whatnot and craziness, or I think we'll see an emphasis on pair bonding and marriage to make up for lost time. So I'm trying to figure out which one will be more likely, but it might just be based on the person.
Yeah, there something is going to happen. We don't know quite yet. Like there is some science experiment that we're living through right now.
Mm.
Yeah, I've read about the baby boom. I'm not sure though what is going to happen because a lot of younger people feel they can't afford to have kids. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. But in terms of more partnerships and serious relationships, I think that probably is likely. Or people who are currently in a relationship that maybe they didn't take so seriously at first. Maybe people want to cultivate that more because I don't know, life seems pretty hard right now, and I have it pretty well. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. There's no time for a bad relationship,
yeah,
we got to find someone who can help us through this. And I feel like a question people will be thinking now when they're dating or whatnot will be like, could I go through quarantine with this person?
oh, totally, yeah.
Could I be locked in a house with them for days on end? I don't know. I don't know if any of us will ever find a partner who we could really say yes to that, but hopefully maybe, I don't know. Hard to
Yeah.
say. So, I know you're a journalist, you're a writer.
Hmm.
What's the latest piece you're working on? And does it relate to Corona or is it separate? Or is everything Corona related
I think
now?
I'm taking a little bit of a break right now.
Oh, nice. Good.
Yeah,
As you
but
should.
yeah, we'll see. I mean, the last piece I wrote was published yesterday in the forward. It was just my reflection on celebrating Passover with my grandmother and how the themes kind of aligned
Mm,
together. It was meaningful. But I think the next thing that I'd be interested in writing would be um, how the situation has gotten me more into meditation. And there's actually a very rich Jewish influence on the Western meditation movement. Yeah, I was learning that they call themselves Jewish Buddhists.
yep.
They're still Jewish. Turns out that Buddhism isn't necessarily just a religion, it's sort of a practice, a mindset. So anytime you close your eyes and breathe and uh, take yourself out of the moment, that's sort of like a Buddhist idea. So um, there was this whole cohort of these Jewish Buddhists back in, I guess, the 1950s or 60s, and they brought those ideas to the East Coast. And yeah, they're kind of responsible for the American mindfulness movement, which is now kind of more mainstream.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so that's something I'm thinking about. I'm not like a strict meditator. I definitely skip a lot of days, but I've
Sure.
been keeping a journal, and I'd say probably about 20 days of a month I do it, and um, it it definitely helps. I was one of those people who was skeptical, but I
Yeah.
think just to take a few moments to think about what you're grateful for, just to take a full breath.
Yeah.
When you think that we're living through a respiratory disease pandemic, means that every breath is so valuable. So
Mm,
to actually take a really full diaphragmatic breath is actually rich. You're like, wow, people are struggling to breathe and I could breathe fully. That's a privilege. So
yeah. That's beautiful. I never actually heard someone make that connection between, I mean, I've talked to a few people on this program about mindfulness and doing more meditation and breathing practices, but I hadn't had anyone make that connection, nor had I, back to the actual virus and how it really is. It's taking away our ability to breathe. So for those who do have it and who are healthy, I mean, you better be utilizing it.
yeah, or
It's
even before
incredible.
the situation, because I'd always try and like do meditation at least like 5 times a year, but never had a routine. And I would notice that when we're not meditating, unless we're like athletes or runners, we're not really using our full breath, which doesn't seem like a big deal because we just breathe naturally. But when you consciously actually make it an exercise, it's like a bicep curl. It's kind of fascinating. And
Yeah.
to think that there's this whole movement of people who have been writing about this, dedicating their life. If you're the the Dalai Lama, I guess his whole job is just to meditate and like lead people. It's a new curiosity of mine, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I actually, have you heard of Wim Hof?
I don't think I know that one. No.
Okay, so he's got a particular, he's called the Iceman, and
Okay.
his claim to fame, and a lot of his claims are backed by science, some not so much, but he has this breathing technique which allows you to harness a lot more of your breath than you normally would on a day-to-day basis, and you're able to withstand unbelievable amounts of cold and also just have renewed revitalization. And it's like you become a whole another human, a human 2.0. And it's so interesting because yeah, we do breathing all the time. I'm breathing right now, but I'm not thinking
Yeah.
about it, and we're never thinking about it. But when you actually do start to think about it, you realize how much potential there is there to change everything about how you look at the world and how you hold yourself. And it's such a simple, small change, but it, it's it's like, yes, it's become more popular nowadays, but for some reason it was never something I was told about in school or growing up. It feels like it's been missing from Western culture, so it's fabulous that it's here now, especially in the wake of this respiratory illness.
Yeah, and it's interesting talking to you about it since there's such an overlap with Jewish people who have been practicing it and really popularizing it. I only really learned about that maybe like a year ago.
Mm,
That wow, mindfulness in the U.S. was uh, originated by sort of this small group of these Jewish Buddhists who I think went to Tibet. I might be off about where it was, but it's definitely in the East, and
Mm,
then they brought it to Massachusetts, and this whole insight meditation thing.
it's a beautiful.
And these people have been actually doing some cool stuff during the quarantine period where one of the leaders, her name's Sharon Salzberg, she's been putting on like webinars, training people how to meditate. So
Mm,
it's like they're passing on the skills for free, actually. So,
mm. Well, if there's anything that's a key tenet of Judaism, it's passing things forward and moving it on to the next generation year by year.
mhm.
That Passover story. So just wrapping up, I know you wrote about some of those themes that connected, the themes of Passover that really resonated for you this year. Is there anything in particular about the holiday of Passover and going through it with your grandmother that you'd like to share that you didn't already share in the article?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I mean, I think that Passover is the holiday about like resilience and liberation, and to be someone who celebrates this holiday every year and to have the disease, it's like she was almost like part of the story. Like she had to be like her own hero. And
Mm,
then there were sort of like these other ironies of, like instead of opening the door for Elijah, now it's like I'm opening her quarantine bedroom door. That's the stranger this year.
mm,
Um, yeah, a bunch of them that aren't coming to me off the top of my head, but
all good.
yeah.
Yeah, I opened the door for Elijah this year, and he was wearing a mask.
Yeah.
No, I didn't open the door actually. My dad was very against us opening the door because of the hallway and neighbors, and rightfully so to some degree. But I don't know if cracking the door for 5 seconds would have been the end of the world. But well, Peter, I want to thank you for being on the program and sharing so much about you and your grandmother and your insights. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise.